Hello everyone, welcome to week 4 topic 1. Our topic right now is storytelling to children with special needs. There is a chapter on this. The chapter is actually really good. It has the discussion of different types of special needs, different types of storytelling to do with kids with special needs, adaptations you can make, and it also has a little information about storytelling in different places, so special places as well as special needs, like going to a hospital to tell stories, or museums, or storytelling on radio or TV. In some of our discussions online, or maybe someone's blog post, they also mentioned storytelling for advertising or marketing. I think there are all sorts of ways we can tell stories and share stories, but specifically this talks about storytelling for children with special needs. This chapter focuses on serving those with disabilities, in part as a response to the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'll go ahead and read it. The Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law on July 26, 1990 by President George H.W. Bush. The ADA is one of America's most comprehensive pieces of civil rights legislation that prohibits discrimination and guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else to participate in the mainstream of American life. That means anyone with a disability who walks through your library doors has the rights to participate in library activities or in checking out materials in the same way or in an accommodated way as regularly abled people. So everyone should be able to use the library. If you want protection under the ADA, you must have a disability. That makes sense. It's defined by the ADA as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Is a person who has a history of record of such an impairment, or a person who is perceived by others as having an impairment. The ADA does not specifically name all the impairments that are covered. That is in part because the list of impairments and disabilities continues to grow over the years. So there are always new ones added, and by not listing them, it allows the law a little bit more flexibility and allows the law to protect more people. Also, I'm interested in the ADA as I am trying to implement universal design in this course. I'm not all the way there yet. But when I do get my videos up to YouTube, one of the things that I like about YouTube is that you can click on the closed captioning. I kind of thought it was silly at first, but I've had several other classes. Heather Moorfield-Lang, who has now left us, unfortunately, but she does great universal design, and I've lifted some of her stuff for this class. But part of her recommendations are put your videos on YouTube so that then they can be closed captioned. Now, I am a person who learns textually. I do not have a disability per se, but I am a terrible listener. So I really like having the closed captioned videos. So keep that in mind. If you are a better reader than listener, you might put on the closed captioning for the videos that I do, if it helps you. Or if you have little ones who are trying to sleep and you want to turn the sound off and don't have headphones around. Anyway, that is one of the things I have done with this course to comply with universal design guidelines. One of the other things is that several of the text things that I provide for you, like the syllabus and the schedule, those are available in Google Docs, which can be turned into a PDF, which can be read by, what's that thing called? Dang it. I think it's called a JAWS reader. Anyway, so if the things are in PDF, then they can be used by someone who has a visual impairment with a reader. And I'm trying to make sure all of my materials are available in that manner. I'm not all the way there yet, but I'm working on it. So complying with the ADA, you can do it as a professor. So if you ever are teaching at the university, you will want to look at universal design. For you as a librarian, whether you're in a school library or a public library, you will want to consider these things. You will want to consider accommodations that you can make to serve all of your patrons. Of course, the American Library Association has guidelines to help you. You can also look at the Association for Library Service to Children. They have some guidelines and pointers to help you as you try to make your library accommodating. Of course, there is programming for serving children with special needs and children with disabilities and library program tip sheets. These tip sheets are fairly comprehensive. They discuss different ways to program for a huge variety of disabilities. So there's a tip sheet for those with vision impairment. There's a tip sheet for deaf children. There's a tip sheet for autistic children. I think being a public librarian is probably a little trickier because you don't know your population. You never know what's going to walk through the door. I feel that way in a school too. Don't get me wrong. Kids walk in, I'm like, what? What was that? I've gotten very good after over 20 years in education, after having interchanges with children. Most of the time when a kid walks away, I'll be like, oh, that one's got autism, or that one is hearing impaired, or that one has a speech impediment. I know, I can tell almost immediately when I start talking to kids, and that's without special ed training. It's just one of those, you get an instinct. And those of you who are in a classroom, you probably have an instinct. Those of you who are going into public librarianship, who maybe haven't had that public service interaction as much, you're going to run across people and your first impression might be that one's a little quirky. You'll start to know. You'll recognize some of the things. Anyway, those tip sheets are very thorough. That's in one of the folders in this week's stuff. I can't tell you which one. I should have gone back and looked. Sorry. Anyway, there's all sorts of support out there. I think all of you are discovering as we go through this class, when you think, oh, I need something, obviously the internet's a good place, but I'm trying to point you in the right direction. So if you are going to be working, if you know for sure you're working with children with disabilities, you might want to bookmark those tip sheets. Even if you don't know for sure, you might want to bookmark those tip sheets. I have gone through them somewhat. I haven't gone through them all, and I plan on doing so. Some of this might be obvious, but this is just a list of some of the different abilities that you might run across. Of course, visually impaired. I have taught visually impaired students. I have one student I have to, I guess you call it blowing up. I take her worksheets or whatever she's got in class or whatever text she gets, and I have to go back to the copier and I have to make them 126% because she has a visual impairment. I do that almost every day. You'll have hearing impaired students. My school does not serve hearing impaired students, so my experience with hearing impaired is limited, to say the least. However, at most school functions there is an ASL interpreter. We have plenty of students at my school with limited mobility. You will see plenty of students with crutches, wheelchairs, all sorts of mobility issues. Autism or the autism spectrum. I have several students who are library assistants who have autism. It's a nice way for them to interact, but not interact too much because they don't want to. So they interact with me and occasionally a couple other students. The library is very much a safe place, at least at my school, and I think in most schools. You'll have students who are learning or behavior issues. Again, I feel like at my high school, my library is a safe space. I have one girl who cries all the time. Oh my gosh, I've spent so much time with her. Poor Madison. Anyway, but she is a student who definitely gets served by our library because she loves manga and she is in there all the time checking out manga, or I have ordered probably 10 different manga drawing books for her. You will run across processing or communication difficulties and, of course, attention deficit. I have one in my house. Oh, my goodness. Our job. One, it's to have some patience and compassion. Holly. I want to tell you a horrifying story. I had a coworker several years ago. She got hired. I had had a great coworker, and then we had this new coworker, and I had misgivings about her. She was my co-librarian. And she took me to task because I wasn't interacting much with our special ed students. And so she took it upon herself to read to the special ed students. And I was initially very excited that she was going to take her time out and go read to them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis until she came back from one of the classes and started making fun of the students, at which point I thought I might stab her in the head. She is lucky she left after a year. So our job is to treat them, all our patrons, with compassion and kindness. I can't say that enough. And having known you guys for a solid 3 weeks now, you all seem like really nice people. So I think you'll be okay. Anyway, when we tell our stories, it's very important for any audience, but particularly with an audience that might have other challenges, to enunciate, be aware of your vocal quality, be very aware of, or be cautious about touch, particularly if you have autistic children. Sometimes they are sensitive to touch. You want to consider having manipulatives, have things that the kids can touch, fold, toss around like a beach ball. I had a fantastic library intern, I guess Megan, her name was Megan Karansky, maybe it was 2 years ago. Anyway, she did a fantastic lesson on Leonardo da Vinci with one of our special ed classes, and then they made paper airplanes to imitate Da Vinci's flying machines, and then they flew those paper airplanes. And it was just a really fun lesson and really cute. So she did manipulatives. Song is always good. If you can sing better than I can. Be aware of your audience. That's important with any group, but you want to be particularly aware of your audience. If you have kids that are sensitive to lights or sound, of course, you don't want to be doing something that has a jump scare in it or something that has yelling as part of the story. And as always, if you've done any teaching, you just got to forgive yourself if something just doesn't fly, because sometimes it doesn't. Keep in mind, if you are telling to students with visual impairment, your vocal quality is even more important. That is where they are getting all of their input. That's just what they're hearing. So your voice has to be making it. Your voice has to be reaching each student. Rhythm is important, always music and song. Anytime you could have any kind of something tactile, something for them to touch, any kind of manipulative, that would be really cool. You would encourage them to use their imagination. Your story should probably be a little bit more descriptive, or you could choose a story that is descriptive in anticipation of an audience with a visual impairment. In an audience with a cognitive impairment, you definitely want to choose familiar topics. You also may want to, if you're in a school and can consult with a special ed teacher, do. They will have awesome insights for you. They might be able to point you to stories that they know their students like, or types of stories that they know they like. So familiar topics are a good idea. Having a comfortable frame of reference. Like I said, my student teacher did Leonardo da Vinci. Now, that special ed class did not particularly know Leonardo da Vinci before the class, but they were certainly familiar with airplanes, paper airplanes, and they were excited by the airplane flying competition. Humor. I have a special ed class that comes in on a daily basis into my library. They provide a coffee service to the entire school. They are hilarious. They're so sweet. They're really lovely kids. Any kind of story time with movement is a great idea. Songs, obviously, and concrete language, and you probably want to limit the number of characters, would probably help too. I do not have experience telling to a hearing impaired audience. There's a guy who does ASL here for the governor who has become almost famous in South Carolina. Anyway, ASL is very, very expressive. So if you have an opportunity to do a telling with a ASL interpreter, it's a really cool opportunity. I would jump at it myself. So you get both the oral input and the pictures and the expression of the teller, but you get the expressiveness of the ASL teller, so you can have a mixed audience. Please don't assume that someone who is hearing impaired is cognitively impaired. They're probably quite competent linguistically. You might want to keep your story to a small cast of characters because trying to sign the different characters would get tricky for your interpreter. Any story that would require physical movement makes a lot of sense. Keep in mind that ASL is its own language and not the signing of English. So it is, I would call it much more symbolic than English. Clear visual presentation is key for deaf or hearing impaired audiences, meaning your photos or your words need to be very clear. And take your time. Don't rush through the story, particularly if you have an interpreter. Oh, and ideally, you would meet with this interpreter ahead of time so that they could familiarize themselves with the story. And this is a complete unrelated thing, but I taught my children sign language when they were pre-literate, like before they could speak. What is that word? Anyway, before they could speak, I taught them sign language, and so my kids still know about 10 different signs, and they were, I mean, they're not very useful signs as adults. They're like more milk and ouch, but it's a nifty way to increase their literacy level. So I've just babbled your ear off, sorry about that. Anyway, this is all the slides on this particular topic. I'm sure there's so much more that I'm missing. However, do make sure you read the chapter. There are 3 topics this week. I'm sorry. I really tried to spread out the materials in a rational manner, and I think you might have your bums kicked this week by the amount of stuff. So anyway, I'll stop talking. Look for 2 other videos this week, unless I run completely out of steam, but I'm feeling good now. It's only Saturday night. So, all right, have a good week and look for 2 more videos. All right, thanks, bye.